Grandma here, and I'm reading Dave at Night, chapter 18. In chapter 17, the art teacher has come to class, and Dave really enjoys learning more about how to draw. Chapter 18. I wanted to cover the drawing, but he'd already seen it, so I just got back to work. I erased the shaded blackboard where Miss Hillinger's head really should be. That way I could look at the old head that I liked while putting in the new one. Courage, Dave. Mr. Hillinger touched my shoulder and then went on down the aisle. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't need courage here in the classroom. Then I forgot about it, looking at Miss Hillinger and working on the head. The new one wasn't as good as the old one, but at least it was in the right place. I didn't erase the old head because I liked it and started working on her shoulder and left arm. Hey, you gave her two heads, buddy. Boy, are you lousy at art. I turned to see Harvey's drawing. His paper was almost all shaded. In the middle was a tiny figure leaning on one leg. My two heads are in my drawing, buddy, I said. Too bad you're two heads. Time's up. Stop, everyone. My leg ached and itched under the bandage. I looked at what I'd done. Miss Hillinger had two heads and disconnected parts of the rest of her. It looked like she'd been chopped to pieces. Even so, the places I had done did jump out at you, and the foot leaning on the stool had weight like it was supposed to. You could feel it pushing down. Mr. Hillinger walked through the aisles again, inspecting. This is fine. Louise, look. I never stopped being. She climbed down from the desk and walked around the edge of the room. I hoped she wouldn't come near me and see herself with two heads. Mr. Hillinger took Bernie's drawing and Eli's and Harvey's and mine. He tacked the four drawings to the corkboard where they all looked rotten next to his. Eli's drawing was big, so big that half of Miss Hillinger's head and her left leg below the knee were off the page. Bernie's drawing was the best. Miss Hillinger wasn't as big as she was in mine, but she didn't have two heads. And the pose was right. I wondered if Mr. Hillinger had picked Eli's, Harvey's, and mine to show how much we had to learn. What do I always say? Mr. Hillinger asked, standing next to our drawings. You can't do a bad drawing till you're a grown-up. You can't do a bad drawing till you're a grown-up, Mr. Hillinger said. He pointed to Bernie's drawing, what I like best. See how Bernie changed the depth and the shadow around? See how dark it is here? He pointed. And what a soft gray. Oh, very good, Bernie. I wondered why he didn't say anything about how well Bernie had drawn Miss Hillinger, how she had the right number of arms and legs and heads, all more or less in the right place. And Harvey's is wonderful too, boys. I didn't have to look at Harvey. I could feel him swelling up. It's small, and I told work big, but he draws with the directness, more like a 6-year-old than an 11-year-old. Hold on to that, Harvey. I turned around grinning. Harvey didn't think it was wonderful to draw like a 6-year-old. His face was bright red. These two, Mr. Hillinger touched my drawing and Eli's. I got ready. My hands clenched. I felt my face go red too. He was going to tell everyone how bad mine was. Have excellent compositions. Your eye moves. He swung his arm in a circle over our drawings. See? Yes, Harvey? Excellent composition, excellent. I wish I knew what he meant about your eye moving in a circle. But Dave's has two heads, and the body is in pieces. And Eli's is missing part of the head and part of the leg. Two heads are fine, not on, but in a drawing. You're searching, and sometimes two heads. Siggy, excuse me, it's 5 after 10. You said to tell you when it was. Mr. Hillinger dashed to the front of the room. Go, Louise, meet me, hurry, don't tell. She was out the door. He'll be here He lifted the stool off the desk. Who was coming? Mr. Doom? My bump started throbbing. Mr. Hillinger whipped the newspaper off the desk and off Mr. Cluck's chair. Boys, up off the floor. Put your drawings on your desk. He handed our drawings back to us and started folding newspaper wildly. At my other schools, I don't have. Sorry, boys, you did fine. Mr. Cluck opened the door. Good morning, Mr. Gluck. As usual, your boys were excellent. I don't know how you. See you next week, boys. Save your drawings for when you're famous. He left. Now, the HHB had two things I liked. The 11s being buddies and Mr. Hillinger's art lesson. For the rest of the morning, I ignored Mr. Cluck's lesson about what was wrong with us. First, I drew Alfie, who sat on my right. I did it as a gesture drawing, working on showing the way he hunched his shoulders. Then I tried to draw Mike, but it was like trying to draw a live butterfly. So then I drew Mr. Cluck with his mouth open, his gesture. And that I turned to a clean page in my notebook. Dear Papa, you know where I am and who put me here and who didn't come here with me. My eyes started to prick. I didn't want to cry. So I won't write about that. I just want to tell you about the art teacher here. You are an artist, so I think you'd be interested. Did you ever hear of a gesture drawing? Did you ever do one? I described Mr. Hillinger and what he taught us and what I thought while I was drawing. At the end, I wrote, and Papa, I had the beginnings of an eye. I'm going to draw as much as I can, and someday maybe I'll be so good that I'll have a whole entire eye. Two, maybe. Then I wrote, miss you, and I signed it, your son, Dave the Rascal, Dave the gesture artist. In the next couple of weeks, while I thought about how to get the carving back and leaving the HHB, I drew as often as I could. I'd always liked to draw, but Papa had been the artist, not me. Now, though, I thought that I might be an artist too and keep art in the family. I figured Papa would like that. The next week, Mr. Hillinger had us do what he called line drawings of a vase filled with flowers. Line drawings were the opposite of shading. They were a new kind of outlining. I never heard anyone talk about the sensitivity of a line before. One time, Mr. Hillinger brought a magazine photograph for us to copy. Another day, he gave out crayons, but he only let us use certain color combinations. Every class we did something new, and after every lesson, I saw things a little differently. 2 weeks after the rent party, the doctor came and removed my stitches. He said I'd have a scar for a long while, maybe forever, which was good. I wanted a souvenir of the time I got the better of Mr. Doom. As the days passed, I stopped waking up every morning wondering where I was, and I stopped expecting Mr. Doom to be hiding around every corner waiting to jump on me. I got to like my buddies more and more. I'd have friends before I came, and once I had a brother, but I never had anything like this. For example, on visiting day, really a half a day, Sunday afternoons, the visitors usually brought food, but not one single 11 ever ate his food then and there. They might take a taste to show appreciation, but they always set the rest aside for nighttime. And after lights out, Eli would divvy up the loot equally, no matter who had contributed and who hadn't. Nobody visited me, but I got to eat as much as anybody else. And on Sunday night, December 5th, which was during Hanukkah, eating as much as anybody else meant eating a lot. The visitors brought at least twice as much as usual. And for the first time in the home, I felt full. So full that I almost passed up a handful of dried dates and figs. Another example of the buddies' loyalty was the time I drew on the photograph of Mr. Meltzer's family, which was on his table in the corner of our room. I pulled it out of its frame, drew mustaches and beards on the faces of his wife and 2 daughters. I made each one different to go with the face. The goatee I put on Mr. Meltzer was especially good. Papa would have laughed his head off. Mr. Meltzer was so mad, he slammed the picture down on the table and broke the glass. By then, I regretted doing it because I was scared he'd drag me to Mr. Doom again. Mr. Meltzer yelled at us for 10 minutes, but nobody would tell who'd done it. In PS 42, somebody would have ratted inside of seconds. I confessed. I couldn't let everybody be delivered to Mr. Doom because of me. He didn't take me to Mr. Doom, but he made me skip breakfast and lunch, and he didn't let me out at recess for a week. Plus, I had to do stupid things over and over, like making my bed and shining my shoes and writing 1,000 times, "I shall never deface a photograph again." One more example of being buddies was the pillow fight one night after the lights out. We did it in absolute silence, and we kept it up for half an hour without the prefect outside the door hearing a thing. At the end, one of the pillows exploded, and Reuben was covered with feathers. Eli tugged him to the window where it was a little brighter, and we spent a half hour holding in our giggles and plucking feathers one by one. I even came to like Harvey once I understood him. He was forever boasting about being a half and saying he was only here temporarily till his mother came for him. And he kept bragging about her, how she was prettier than anyone else's mother and smarter. But she didn't come to see him very often. In a month, she only showed up once. When she didn't come, Harvey would hardly open his mouth for a few days afterwards. And when she did come, she brought too much stuff. This may sound crazy when we starved 6 days a week, but it was true. The time she came, she brought a honey cake, 10 chocolate cupcakes, a whole salami, a thick woolen sweater, and a camera. See, it was too much. But what really made me like Harvey was that he pretended the sweater was too small and gave it to Alfie. Even though I like my buddies and I like Mr. Hillinger, the things I hated about the hellhole for brats bothered me more and more as time went on. I couldn't get used to the bells. Ting-a-ling, wake up. Ting-a-ling, go to sleep. Ting-a-ling, talk. Ting-a-ling, shut up. I couldn't get used to being constantly cold. At home, the front room and the bedroom were cold in the winter, but the kitchen was always warm, especially in front of the coal stove. Gideon and I used to drag the couch cushions in there on freezing nights, and we'd sleep by the stove and be toasty warm. Gideon, I couldn't get used to getting letters from him. Once every week saying how much he was learning, how kind Uncle Jack was, what a busybody the landlady was. He'd end every letter by telling me to write to him because he missed me. Too bad for him, I wasn't the one who got on a train to Chicago. I flushed every letter down the toilet. Most of all, more than anything else, I couldn't get used to Papa being dead. I thought about him all the time. He'd be furious that Mr. Cluck never taught us anything. And Moe's food stealing, well, if he was alive, he'd never tell him about that. I'd never tell him about that. The food stealing was my problem. He'd think Harvey was a windbag, but he'd like Mike and Eli. He'd feel sorry for Alfie with consumption. But Mr. Doom would make him as mad as he could get. He'd think that a man who would steal from an orphan was lower than a cockroach. He'd think a man who would endanger kids' health by keeping them cold and half starving them was even lower than that. He'd spit on Mr. Doom's face. When I'd think like that, which was often, I'd get a huge lump in my throat that wouldn't go up and wouldn't go down. It would stay stuck, like I was stuck here, stuck being an orphan, a whole orphan. Harvey was right, not 3/4. I was a whole. Well, we're learning a little bit more about what life was like in the Hebrew home for boys. But I'm wondering if he's ever going to meet up with Sally and Irma Lee again. But we'll find out. Bye-bye.